They say if the wind shifts in Kisumu on a Thursday, someone's marriage is about to break. That's what the old fisherman said, his hands rough, his eyes cloudy with stories. He said it without looking up, just staring at the lake like it had answers. Brenda laughed when she first heard it. Superstition, she thought, until it happened to her. It had rained that Thursday, not just a drizzle, but the kind of rain that floods alleys and silences motorbikes. The sky was bruised purple, the clouds hanging low like they carried secrets. And somewhere between the first clap of thunder and the last drop of rain, 4 hearts began to shift, slowly, like tectonic plates beneath the city. In the heart of Kisumu, a city kissed by the waters of Lake Victoria, where fish markets buzz in the morning and the air carries the rhythm of both tradition and hustle, 2 couples were living parallel lives, lives that were about to twist into something no one expected. Brenda was a woman who knew how to hold attention. She ran one of the busiest beauty salons in the area. She wore bold lipsticks and bright colors, her laugh carried through the streets, and her nails, always perfectly manicured, spoke of a woman who took pride in being seen. But inside, Mwende was tired. Not from work, not from motherhood, but from silence. Her husband, Eli, a reserved man in his late 30s, worked at the county offices. He was home every evening by 6, had his dinner at 7, watched the news by 8, and went to bed by 9. No conversation, no compliments, no warmth. He loved through routine, not through words or touch. Mvenda had begged for more. Now she had stopped asking. One Thursday, her assistant called in sick. Mvenda, needing a break from her stale home atmosphere, decided to grab lunch alone. She walked into a restaurant she'd never noticed before. Bright orange walls, loud Nigerian music, and the warm scent of jollof rice dancing through the air. That was where she met Chibuzo. Chibuzo had a smile that could crack stone. A Nigerian living in Kenya, he ran the restaurant with flair and flavor. When he saw Mwende, he clapped once, pointed at her and said, "Ah, this beauty must be trouble." She laughed, genuinely. Something in his energy disarmed her. He walked over, offered her a plate of suya on the house and asked, "Madam, what are you running from?" She smiled and said, "A life where I no longer feel seen." From that moment, something unspoken began. She started visiting the restaurant weekly, then twice a week. Then it became part of her routine. Meanwhile, Eli, who had started attending evening youth development meetings, met Amina, Chibuzo's wife. Amina was grace in human form. She spoke gently, listened intently, and had a way of making people feel heard. She often stayed behind after the meetings to clean up. Eli noticed. He offered to help one day, and she thanked him with a shy smile and a story about her village life. It became a pattern. After each meeting, they walked to the stage together, sometimes sat and watched the lake ripple under the night sky. Nothing was said, but something was growing. Back at the restaurant, Chibuzo started saving Mwenda's favorite seat. She'd walk in and he'd say, "Ah, my Kenyan queen is here." They began texting. At first, it was casual. "Try the new egusi soup today." Then it became deeper. "Hope today wasn't too heavy on your heart." And soon, "I keep thinking of the way your eyes light up when you laugh. Haven't seen that in a long time." Mwenda would lie awake at night, reading his messages. She'd glance at Eli sleeping beside her, peaceful, distant. Her fingers would hover over her screen, her heart torn. Across town, Amina was also battling quiet feelings. She didn't know when exactly it happened, but Eli's steady voice and quiet strength began filling the spaces her husband's loudness used to. They'd talk about their dreams, their regrets. One evening, it rained hard, and Amina forgot her umbrella. Eli offered her his coat. As she wore it, their hands brushed, her breath caught. He noticed, but said nothing. That night she didn't sleep. They were all standing on a line, thin, fragile and trembling. And the heart? The heart was already crossing it. There are fires that burn in the open, flames people can point at, talk about, gossip over. And then there are the ones that stay hidden, smouldering, quiet, slow, but far more dangerous. That was the kind of fire building between Mwende and Chibuzo. It started with texts. Then came the voice notes. Late nights turned into long digital conversations. And before she knew it, Mwende was falling asleep with her phone under her pillow, Chibuzo's last words still playing in her ears. "You're not just beautiful, Mwende. You're alive, and I see that, all of it." She didn't reply at first. Then one night she whispered into her phone, "No one's told me that in years." And that was it. The door had opened. Meanwhile, across town, Eli and Amina grew closer in a different rhythm. Where Mwende and Chibuzo were fire, Eli and Amina were water. Calm, soft, flowing. After each youth meeting, they would walk together. Sometimes they didn't even speak, just watched the streetlights flicker on over Kisumu, listened to the lake lap against the shore. One evening, Amina baked mandazi and brought some for Eli in a warm cloth napkin. He took a bite, smiled. "It tastes like peace." She laughed, but her eyes welled up. "No one's ever called my cooking anything more than okay." He looked at her, really looked, and said, "Then no one's really tasted it." She turned away, but not before he saw her blush. Back at the restaurant, things were boiling. Mwenda started staying longer. She helped Chibuzo arrange shelves, taste recipes, even stayed past closing time to talk. One night, as he was locking up, the power went out. The whole block sank into darkness. She laughed nervously. "Well, looks like I'm not going home just yet." He lit a candle. The soft light danced on her skin. He leaned on the counter. She leaned closer. "You ever wonder," he said, "why some people enter your life so loudly you can't ignore them?" She swallowed. "All the time." Their hands touched, then their lips. Slow, searching, dangerous. Back in Eli's car, after another long community night, Amina rested her head against the window. Rain was falling softly outside. Eli reached over and covered her hand with his. "I feel guilty," she said. "So do I. But I also feel something I haven't felt in years," he nodded. "Alive?" She looked at him. "Exactly." Silence fell, then she leaned in. Their kiss was short, soft, but it left an ache that stayed with them all night. Both couples were now standing not at the edge, but mid-step into something irreversible. But secrets are like oil on water. They don't sink. They shine. They show. And soon, someone would see something they shouldn't have. It started with a scarf. A soft golden scarf Mwenda had forgotten in Chibuzo's restaurant kitchen after one of their late-night talks. Or maybe she left it on purpose. Maybe she wanted to be remembered. But it wasn't Chibuzo who found it first. It was Amina. She'd come in early to surprise her husband with lunch and found the scarf on a chair by the back counter, still warm, still smelling faintly of Mwende's vanilla perfume. She didn't say anything right away, just folded it neatly and put it in her purse. Her hands didn't shake. Her heart did. That night, she didn't sleep. And for the first time in their marriage, she didn't pray before bed. Across town, Eli stood outside the bathroom holding Wendy's phone. It had buzzed with a message from Chef. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. His stomach turned. In that moment, something fragile cracked inside him. The next evening, Eli skipped the community meeting. Amina noticed. She walked alone that night and felt it, the silence, the distance, the beginning of unraveling. Chibuzo noticed something was off too. Amina barely spoke to him at dinner. She didn't ask about his day. Her eyes looked past him, not at him. He tried to hold her hand. She pulled away. "You're not the only one who knows how to hide things," she said softly. Mwenda, on the other hand, was unraveling differently. Her days became rushed. She snapped at clients, forgot appointments. At night, she sat in the salon after everyone left, staring at herself in the mirror like she didn't recognize her own reflection. Guilt began to whisper louder than excitement. Then came the real slip. It was a Friday night. The restaurant was full, buzzing with energy. Mwenda arrived late. Chibuzo had saved her a plate. They spoke at the back, too close, too long. They forgot about the waitstaff moving in and out. One waiter, a young man from the neighborhood, saw them kiss behind the storage door. Just a moment, just enough. By Sunday, word was floating in the market like perfume, soft, sweet, and unmistakably scandalous. Did you hear? I heard Eli's wife and that Nigerian man. And his wife, the quiet one, so sad. Eli heard it from his barber. Amina heard it in the choir. Neither said a word, but both knew. That evening, Amina walked into the kitchen and dropped the golden scarf on the table. It landed like a thunderclap. "Whose is it?" she asked. Chibuzo didn't answer. She nodded slowly, then turned away. Eli didn't ask questions either. He came home, took a long look at Mwenda and simply said, "We need to talk." But Mwenda was already crying. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. "Doesn't matter," Eli said, his voice empty. It did. In 4 houses across Kisumu, the wind stopped blowing. Doors closed louder than usual. Eyes turned to windows instead of faces. Something had slipped. And now, nothing would be the same. Unraveling doesn't always come with screams. Sometimes it comes with silence. Heavy, lingering. The kind that settles between people like fog and refuses to lift. For the first time in their marriage, Eli and Mwenda slept in separate rooms. No fight, no shouting, just a quiet agreement that closeness had become unbearable. Amina moved back to her sister's house without saying goodbye. She packed her bag in the early morning, left a note on the pillow, and took only what she needed. Chibuzo came home to find the house cold, her shoes gone, her scent replaced by emptiness. The golden scarf still sat on the kitchen table, untouched. The city around them didn't pause. Kisumu kept moving, matatus honking, boda riders speeding, preachers shouting from street corners. But their worlds had slowed. Mwenda tried to go to work. She stood in the middle of her salon and looked at the chairs, the mirrors, the colours. Everything looked loud, wrong, like a world she no longer belonged to. She locked the door and went home. Eli stayed later at work, filed papers no one asked for, answered calls that didn't matter. When he finally came home, he sat on the balcony, staring at the same street, wondering how a good man can lose a woman without ever raising his voice. Chibuzo tried calling Amina. She didn't pick up. He went to her sister's house once, waited outside in the rain. She watched from the window, but didn't open the curtain. Inside, she sat with her mother's old Bible on her lap. She didn't read it, just held it. In their loneliness, each of them questioned everything. Was it worth it? What they felt? The touches? The kisses? Was that love? Or just borrowed warmth from people who were also starving? Mwenda sent a message to Chibuzo. "I miss you, but I can't do this if someone else is bleeding for our joy." He replied, "Then let's stop pretending we didn't love, but let's not keep hurting." Amina finally answered Eli's text. He had sent her a simple message. "I'm sorry I gave you peace when it wasn't mine to give." She replied, "You didn't break me, but you did open a door I'll never walk through again." Weeks passed. Divorce papers were signed, quietly. No lawyers shouting, no families dragged into the fire, just 2 signatures on each side, a surrender, a decision to stop the bleeding. The news circled Kisumu. As quietly as it had begun, the gossip stopped. And just like that, 2 marriages ended. But something else began, something slower, something real. They say healing doesn't always feel like light pouring in. Sometimes it feels like quiet, like mornings where no one asks questions, like drinking tea alone and not minding the silence. For weeks, Mwenda stayed off social media. She stopped explaining, stopped defending. She moved into a small apartment above a grocery shop, far from where she and Eli used to live. The first night she cried. The second, she rearranged the furniture. By the third, she started breathing differently. Across town, Chibuzo threw himself into the restaurant. He expanded the menu, trained new staff, started hosting open mic poetry nights. At first, it was just to stay busy, but then he realized he was building something for himself, not just for distraction. Amina, she began teaching again, part-time at a local girls' school. She wore bright head wraps and told her students, "You are more than someone's wife-in-waiting." Some nights, she'd walk alone along the lakefront, her bare feet touching the cold water. It grounded her, gave her something her marriage never had, freedom. Eli moved into a smaller place too. He joined a hiking group, something he always thought about but never tried. He stopped trying to fix people and started fixing up old furniture. His hands were calmer now, less eager to hold on, more willing to let go. Then, one sunny Saturday morning, the shift happened. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't planned. Mwende bumped into Chibuzo at the supermarket. Literally, she was reaching for mangoes. He was reaching for hot sauce. Their carts collided. She froze. He laughed. "Still mixing fire and sweetness, I see." She smiled quietly. "Still offering pepper when no one asked." They stood there for a moment. The world didn't blur. The music didn't swell. But something shifted. She asked him, "Do you want to walk?" They left their carts, walked down to the edge of the city where the market noise faded and the lake breeze carried whispers instead of rumors. They didn't talk about the past. They didn't talk about pain. They talked about mango trees, childhood dreams, why suya should never be sweet. That night, she didn't cry. That night, he didn't feel guilty. Somewhere else, Eli sat at a small cafe with Amina. It wasn't a date, but it was the first time they saw each other, not as broken people, but as whole ones. Amina told him about her students. Eli told her about his hikes. They laughed, not like before. This laugh wasn't secretive. It wasn't stolen. It was allowed. And it was in those small moments, the unexpected run-ins, the coffee talks, the quiet walks, that the shift truly began. Not toward what was, but what could be. In every story, there comes a moment when the characters must choose, not between good and evil, not between right and wrong, but between the life they've known and the life they truly want. For Mwende, that moment came on a balcony, barefoot, with the city lights flickering below. Chibuzo stood beside her, holding 2 cups of tea. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that only follows storms. He looked at her. "I want this," he said, "but only if you want it too. No hiding, no guilt, just us." Mwenda didn't answer right away. She looked at the street, at the people walking, at the woman she used to be. Then she said, "I've spent so long asking for permission to be happy. Maybe it's time I stop asking." Across town, Amina stood in front of her mirror, wrapping her headscarf slowly. Her phone buzzed. It was Eli. "Coffee today. Just us, no past." She stared at the message, smiled, typed back, "Let's choose now, not then." The city moved like it always had, but something was different. Not louder, not flashier, just more honest. Mwenda and Chibuzo didn't rush. They spent more days walking, more nights talking. They told each other the ugliest parts of their past. They listened. They chose to stay. One evening, he knelt, not with a ring, but with a question. "Can I build this life with you, brick by honest brick?" She said yes, not with a shout, but with tears. Eli and Amina took longer. They remained friends for a while, talked like equals, grew like trees next to each other, not wrapped around each other. But one day, while watching the lake, Eli whispered, "If I asked you again, without all the noise, would you give me a different answer?" Amina smiled. "If I did, it would be a real yes this time." So they chose, not out of loneliness, not out of fear, but from clarity. Not everyone clapped for them. Some still whispered. But this time, they didn't need applause. They had peace, and that was enough.